Hi, this is Louis Paul. This is the Colors of Prague. This is season 4, episode 25. Calling us on progressive rock from the dark edge. We'll be covering three bands with ties to dark subject matters or the occult. First, Jacula, Jacula, over my shoulder there. Jacula was founded in Italy in 1968. Their self-released debut album pretty much disappeared shortly after release. And any copies found today, I'm sure to be highly collectible and expensive. Tordo Pede Imagium Versus, their second album, draws influences from the occult, Gothic Italian horror films of the 60s, and weird rituals never defined. Anthony, or Antonio, Bartocchetti plays guitars and contributes vocals. Doris Norton, an Englishwoman or a German woman, there's so much misinformation out there, or maybe both, was also Bartocchetti's partner. She was rechristened Fiamma dello Spirito. Now, Doris, or Fiamma, sings in fluent Italian, plays flute and violin apparently quite well. Charles Turing, an alleged septuagenarian scholar of music and the dark arts, contributes organ, church organ, harpsichord, and moog. The band also had employed a full-time medium working with them. His name was Franz Partemini. Now, Antonio and Doris and/or Fiamma have been said to be on an unusual spiritual journey and were alleged to be living in castles in Europe, resulting in highly unusual music, not for the faint of heart. The first track, UFDEM, features loud, majestic church organ and a gloomy atmosphere. By the second track, Presentia Domini, we find ourselves in what sounds like a black magic ritual. And it could very well may have been. Swirling moog and organ gives way to the female and male chanting. If you know Italian, this is kind of strong stuff. It's really not for prog newbies or sensitive mindset beliefs. And this track lasts for 11 minutes. Jacula Valzer, Valzer, calms things down quite a bit, and it sounds like wordless vocals. It sounds like a tune that could have come from an old Mario Bava film. If anyone's familiar with the name Mario Bava, he was an Italian filmmaker, director, early 1960s, all through the 70s of black and white and color Italian horror films. His black and white films are very distinctive. They had a very interesting score. And you can imagine this being a score to one of those movies. It's like that. Still eerie, but less of a traumatic listening experience than what came before. Long Black Night, all 11 minutes of it, opens with a nice solemn flute solo by Doris that leads to a quieter spoken word recitation from her. That is partially in fluent German, then Italian, and then a combination of the two until she switches to English language. The final song, and the fifth one in this album from Jacula, is 10 minutes long. It's called In Old Castle, pretty simply stated. It's pretty much a vocal-less moog and church organ piece of music that reminded me of one of those old silent films, or again, one of the early Gothic films from Europe that I used to watch as a youngster. It eases the listener gently out of what came before. And not too surprisingly, Jacula disbanded, and Bartolcetti and Norton, aka Fiamma, otherwise under another batch of names, returned with Antonius Rex a decade or so later. The music then was becoming more guitar heavy, but still ominous. Antonius Rex, believe it or not, they're still around. The latest, or they were a decade ago. Their latest album, 2013's Demonapathy, that's a tongue twister, is a cult album for all those who embrace its dark music, and a concept album about the torture of possessed women, or something like that. Screams are a huge turnoff, and if you can find it streaming, be forewarned. Now, here's an interesting note. Doris Norton went on to become a dabbler in electronic music on her own and released several solo albums. She also became a consultant for IBM and Apple, and this is true. Underground, an album composed on Moogs and other synthesizers, even features the original Apple logo as her album cover. So that was Jacula. Next, we have Magic Brother and Mystic Sister. Tarot, Part 1. Said by some sources to be the fifth release from the band from Barcelona, Spain, it also appears to be the full-length debut album because they've done EPs before then. So whether or not this is true, I'm not sure, but this is the first time I'm discovering them. Tarot Part 1 follows a spiritual journey through the tarot cards, beginning with O to 10, 10 being the Wheel of Fortune. It's quite the psychedelic experience with dreamy vocals from Eva Montada, and Xavi Sandoval plays bass, guitars, and mandolin, and Alejandro Carmona on percussion. And Eva also plays keyboards. On this album, they are aided by guest musicians on sitar, flute, and several backing singers. This was released on their own Sound Effects Records label in 2024 in March, so it's not that old. It's a dreamy, ethereal record, equal parts psychedelic and lush soundscapes. Kind of reminded me a bit of Enya. There's some Canterbury-type keyboard and guitar moments that reminded me of Camel. And then there's Gong itself. And Magic Brother from David Allen and Company was the name of Gong's debut album in 1969. So there's your connection to that. But you know what it really reminded me of? It reminded me of several versions of the Battle of Nevermore from Led Zeppelin 4, where Sandy Denny and Robert Plant were on. Well, Sandy Denny guested on that as a co-singer. And it just sounded like different speeded versions of the Battle of Nevermore. And I was like, that's interesting. Oh, no, it's a preferable, more relaxing listen than the Jacula album, although I got the vibe, although we were in similar, but not as dark territory. Now, finally, to my left, we have Meta e Clavis Imperat. The album's called Carmina Occulta, released in 2024. It updates that Jacula sound for what has become known in more recent years as black metal, horror rock, something that includes odes to Italian Gothic and Giallo horror films, like those memorable Goblin soundtracks, but shakes the quirky melodrama of spoken word and some apparently spooky sounding incantations and it just hand stamps it. It's like the Jacula album. This is an updated sound, but different. Italian multi-instrumentalist Samuel von Martin, um, is that his name? Also known as the Lord of Sorrow, self-proclaimed, came from a number of Italian black metal bands, including Death Dies and Abhor. Yes. The singer and multi-instrumentalist created Mater in 2022 with Isabella, that's it, on lead vocals and assorted guest musicians. Atrux Locus followed 2 years later, and then in 2024, Carmina Occulta. Carmina Occulta, before I go further, is a rewrite of Karl Orff's Carmina Burana, which was a operetta in German set to a series of poems and music. Now, there's so many contributors on this album, from Elisa Montaldo on a variety of keyboards, synthesizers, effects, and vocals. And Eliza comes from the Italian band Il Tempio della Classe, which features Stefano Lupo Galiffi from Museo Rosenbach on lead vocals. Cristiano Roversi from Moongarden, of all places, and Mangiavalis and Submarine Silence contributes keyboards, piano, mellotron, and samples. So what does this sound like? Spooky sounding spoken word narration opens the album, ominous sounding keyboards, howling winds, church organ, very similar to Jacula sound, and then a loud crunchy guitar. More keyboards color the atmosphere. Then there's a female spoken word narration in Italian, and there's some harmonizing, female harmonizing, some keyboard motif. Actually, the keyboard motif resembles Claudio Simonetti's Goblin work, so pace picked up a little bit. And it's not a harsh listen. It's not tough to listen to. It's not you're going to play this and your daughter will get possessed, or your cat will get possessed, or your dog will get possessed, or your wife who wants to be possessed gets possessed, or the wife you want to be possessed gets possessed. It's not that kind of album. It's more kind of low key, considering that the guy who put this together, the Lord of Sorrow, played with so much death metal music earlier. So it's a lot of spoken word and singing by the female vocalist, and then sometimes soundless chanting. But I tell you, they also, like track 6, they have some folk instruments here. So I didn't think I'd ever hear hurdy-gurdy, an oud, and a banjo play together. And but the time of track 10 comes, a woman coughing and sobbing to a mournful piano and spooky winds almost made me shut this off. It's not a harsh listen, it's just different. And the EC Comics cover, this is only a portion of this, comics-like cover, is pretty wild. And there's inside cover art that, yeah, it's pretty outrageous. So the dark side of progressive rock, let's say. That's a show for today. It's a bit of a different one, but I've been listening to this stuff, and probably the only one I would go back to and listen again in a more comfortable tone would be Magic Brother and Mystic Sister, Tarot Part 1. These others, not so much, but I wanted to give them a listen because if I didn't do it, who would? Thanks again for listening.